Will take a strong position against hate speech. We are pretty neutral about it. Welcome to everybody. Since we have lesser time than we plan to have, so I will go about it in a slightly business-like manner. I'll give very brief introductory remarks on what this issue is. Then I'll request speakers on this very distinguished panel who come from varying backgrounds to throw light on their own perspectives on this issue. And then I hope to give at least 40 minutes for discussions on this topic. Before we start, just want to ask how many people had heard of net neutrality before this IIGC brought it up into your consciousness? Okay, fine. There seems to be some interesting contrast with all the people on this side seeming to be aware and this side. So there is no neutrality even in the way we are sitting in this room. So for the people who haven't heard of this term earlier, it's a very simple concept that on the internet, you don't know if the person on the other side of the wire is a dog or not a dog. It doesn't matter to you. The other person may be a dog or a chimpanzee or a gorilla. The power of that animal doesn't matter to you because irrespective of who the website owner is, you always get to receive the content in a neutral way. So you may be typing on and going on to the website of a small NGO like IT for Change, which is the organization I come from, or you might be onto the website of google.com, the famous search engine, and in principle both these sites should come on in the same way and there should be no discrimination between the two, and which is what is called as a dumb network. The network is dumb. It doesn't have any intelligence. It pushes packets in a completely neutral way. It doesn't care what's in the packet. It may be a voice packet, it may be a video packet, it may come from a small farmer in Jalandhar, or it may come from Microsoft, doesn't matter. But in the recent past, we have been hearing arguments that that cannot be the case, that should not be the case, and that we will need to have a situation where based on the sender or based on the type of data, there needs to be some kind of discrimination. So we'll hear more about both points of view. One saying that there should be no discrimination and no violation of what is called the end-to-end principle, and the other arguing maybe that there is a need for it, and we shall debate and discuss both points of view. So traditionally what has been the case in this issue is that content providers have always been arguing that all content should be treated without discrimination. So we will start with hearing the views of a content provider. We have Mr. Ajit Balakrishnan, who is the founder and CEO of Rediff.com with us. And he's also currently chairman of the Government of India MCIT Committee on Internet Governance. And coming from Rediff, which is a very important content services provider in the Indian scene, we would like to hear his views on what network neutrality is. Yeah, please. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, in 1995, the internet in India was myself and maybe about 6 or 7 guys in a 300 square feet room in Bombay. And I'm so happy to see that now it is enlarged enough to have so many conferences and such violent debates. Look at this slide that I put up. Today you'll see a lot. Net neutrality is a word like in Indian newspapers have reform. And when we were like college kids, the word love meant many different things to many different people. So you hear some people shouting, saying, free press. That's what net neutrality guarantees. Others say, my country's competitiveness depends on it. Still others say, look, why are you interfering with business? Why can't we charge different prices for different service levels? That is the nature of things. That is how the world works. Others want democracy, freedom of expression, rules and regulations. I thought I'd spend about 3 minutes taking you through who are the people saying what. This whole debate started when international webcos and web companies, including ourselves, and broadband providers started tussling, saying, one party said, we want to charge different prices with different kind of effort we have to make to provide services. And people from our side, the content and application companies, immediately raised the banner of free press. That puts us both on an equal footing. arrived tech entrepreneurs. Most of us tech entrepreneurs, including myself, are at heart libertarians. We hate any kind of control. So I think we raised this issue of competitiveness and democracy, so that muddied the water even more. Civil liberties groups, such as what my good friend from there comes from. In India, we have large numbers of civil liberties groups, and we depend on them to defend our democracy. And they joined the democracy debate. And soon, a bewildered government, I mean, I'm serving on 2-3 government committees, I can tell you, most bureaucrats and certainly all the ministers are completely bewildered by what all this is. So they entered. Content owners jumped in the meantime. They said, how can you take my content and make it searchable and freely give to others? In the United States, that bill almost got passed. They wanted to have DNS level control of who can view what controls of what content. Law enforcement is in countries like India a big issue. So I think we have any smallest amount of social unrest in the internet and the web. I used to propagate it on both sides. And finally, the nation state itself, people are saying, is it relevant anymore? The great institution which governed the world in the late 19th century. I keep thinking of poor Bismarck. He must be turning in the grave now when people say the nation state is dead. So you are going to hear all of these viewpoints. And I urge everyone calm their tempers down and see that each interest group has a point to make. And the word net neutrality is like true love. It is to be pursued, never to be achieved. Okay? So, so please remember that. Having said that, before I give up the podium, I have one selfish angle to pursue here, which is that my book, which deals with all of these debates, is out next week from Macmillan. So feel free to go and read it, and it devotes a lot of its time to defining some of these issues. So thank you very much.
Well, that was a very short submission. We have more time for discussions. Thanks to Ajit. Maybe in the question round, we'll ask him how vocal as a content company he would be for or against net neutrality. The second speaker we have today is Mr. Vikram. He's Associate Director General of the Cellular Operators Association of India. And we've had members from COI in other panels as well, which is India's leading industry association on telecom and broadband. So this is, we'll probably hear from him as to why network neutrality is not such a good idea. Yeah. You will speak from here?
Oh, thank you very much. It's interesting. So, I'm sitting in the, on the other side of you is the telecom regulators representative, and just, prior to heading into this room, what we were discussing was, hey, do you have jurisdiction over this? Who has jurisdiction over this? So, it's still, a little shades of gray as to who's going to figure it out, as to where and who will govern net neutrality as such. And I really like Ajit's saying that true love, always pursue it, perceptions about what you achieve and how you can achieve. So, that will be an ongoing debate with the telecom service providers or the ISPs versus the guys who are pushing content down the pipes. All right. Quickly, I think it'll be more interesting to hear and respond to comments rather than what we have to say. But from a telecom service provider's perspective, clearly what we've got is, there is this ocean of data that is building up in terms of content and all kinds of services. It is literally an ocean building up, right? And the users are upstream in the rivers and the tributaries. So you got access to the ocean, which will have to come through, the pipes or the rivers or the tributaries. And who's going to make them? Who's investing in actually providing you, reaching that great ocean? So the guys in the ocean are obviously wanting everybody, okay, come to the ocean, take your dip in it. Much of it may be free as far as they are concerned. But the guys who are going to build out the tributaries are putting in a lot of hard capex into it. I have some data about the capex growth and what it will entail. You're already seeing it, the price of spectrum, which, the government of India, the reserve price they put out, the price of rolling out networks, And many governments all over the world actually see telecom access as one of the most convenient methods of taxation. You got millions of folks there. You raise the price, the cost of a minute by a few paisa. And here, let's say in India's case, you get 630 or 650 million targeted users. And there's a clear audit trail to bring in, rake in the money. So all this actually comes around as to where are the investments coming from? Like in the previous session, where will the investments come from? Who gets the ROI? Where is the money going to flow, right? So if you understand that part, now from a telecom service provider's perspective, of course we want net neutrality. Of course, things should be as level playing field as possible, right? But a true level playing field, you got to work very hard at it, right? So everybody should work at creating that true level playing field. Now, if the field is not level, then obviously all these debates will continue to be between the content providers, what they want to push, and what can actually go down to the user. And of course, my friend Dr. Pepper is here. We heard the zettabytes of data that are going to be there, led by video, file sharing, right? And clearly, what we are seeing is the CAGR on cloud services. I'm told Cisco's projections are cloud services growth is going to be 66%. Now, obviously, to provide the access to the cloud service, the telecom guys got to work hard at it, right? Whichever ISPs and the MNOs. Now, the investments there is something which is the question mark, which we hope we can discuss further. So while India, as of now, does not have a stated position yet, there is discussion on, and what Arvind was telling me, we had a position paper made out by the TRAI on possible regulatory issues in a cloud environment. So the discussions are on, and I'm sure the proceedings of today's gathering and what we discuss around here and in the other session, the one on the ITRs, I'm sure there'll be a good value addition in terms of the quality of discussions that goes away. Point of concern that continues as part of this neutrality debate is, the government's role in actually saying privacy issues, security issues. Just yesterday, I got back from Colombo, and the most hotly debated session was on net neutrality, followed by the one on security in a cloud environment. So these are issues we hope to hear more. And in India particularly, it is the telecom service providers which are licensed and therefore are under the yoke of the government to implement all this stuff. So when you see that environment, then how the liability that we have is something that we are answerable to. So in that discussion, all the last week's video and the number of SMSs you put or the content. So that's an interesting debate, and I'm sure we should get somebody within the government. One of the challenges, before I close, we find is, between the DIT or different departments of the government, while there is convergence in the technology, there's convergence, everybody flowing into the cloud and convergence of services. But there is not as much convergence in the management of the regulation, right? And who is the CTO of the government? Who is the guy who's understanding all this? Are we having enough debate around it? So that's something that, we hope will emanate as part of today's endeavors. I hand you back. Thank you.
Thanks, Vikram. So the issue of who will pay for all the videos and all the emails that we sent across, that's the question that he raised. I'll next invite Subramaniam, who is the president of ISOC India, to speak. ISOC has been a very important player nationally, globally, in assessing, in understanding, and in fighting for user rights, and I am sure that he'll have a very strong take on this net neutrality principle. Over to you, Shiva.
Thank you, Guru. And I'm actually concerned about the possibility that Government of India, together with the telecom operators and ISPs, would find it very tempting to alter the neutral ecosystem of the internet. Government for a reason and telecom companies for a different reason. Government for the ability to monitor the internet and to decide what is to be allowed and what is not to be allowed. And government would also be interested in building up surveillance capabilities over every man, woman and child in the country. And telecom operators would like to discriminate between one type of traffic and another type of traffic with a view to come up with innovative business models that maximizes their revenues. And that's a perfect fit. The internet has enormously succeeded only because of the because of its end-to-end architecture of a dumb pipe with intelligence in the edges. And it has become very successful. The more it has become successful, the more successful it becomes, the more tempting it is for the government to control the internet, and more tempting for the operators to come up with more interesting business models. And in this, I hear very interesting phrases, and I hear QoS from operators and child pornography from governments. So these are some of the arguments which make government say that the net neutrality needs to be altered, and with capabilities like deep packet inspection. The real problem in India is that the average user in India is not aware of net neutrality issues, and those who become aware are not adequately consulted because there is no transparency. And without transparency, without consultation, it becomes easy for the government to make changes and issue directives which get silently implemented. So that is the greatest danger that we have in India. And the only hope that I have about net neutrality is that we have some of our telecom players, or the largest of our telecom players, or large industrial groups whose revenue and survival does not depend on telecom alone. They have very diverse interests, and they are known to have contributed to the economy of the country, and they are known to have values. And I don't believe that they would do something destructive in order to have a revenue model. And I would appeal to them to impress upon the government that the network has to remain neutral and it should be left alone. Thank you.
Thanks, Shiva. That was a counter perspective from a user. For all of us, for many years, when we click on a link and we get the data, we are completely sure that nobody has messed up between the creator of that data and us in sending that data across to us. So if I'm going to a website, if I'm searching for information on a particular topic, and there are different websites that are available to me, I'm reasonably sure that the packet that each of them will send to me will be treated in the same way. So what Shiva spoke about, deep packet inspection, where every packet is inspected by the service provider, what are the implications of that from a political censorship point of view, or from a commercial gain point of view, are things that we need to think about. Our next speaker is Ms. Teresa Swinehart, who is the Executive Director of Global Internet Policy, Verizon Communications. One question I'll have for her, we heard Mr. Vikram speak about who will pay for it, and one question that comes to my mind is that obviously people are paid for it, right? People who are subscribing to the internet, there are different kinds of plans based on what kind of speed you want. You want a lower speed, you want a lesser bandwidth per month, then you pay a particular amount. You want unlimited bandwidth and you want very high throughput, then you may pay a different amount. But obviously everybody pays for it. So if the internet has had the subscription model, why would the providers think that the subscription model will not be able to pay for the expansion? That's a question that came to my mind on hearing the second speaker. I hope she will throw some light on it and also bring international perspectives. This is not only a national issue, and I think there are various developments on network neutrality debates in the US and in different countries in Europe as well. So I'll request you to throw some light on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First, I'd like to really thank the Ministry for Communications and Information Technology, FICCI, and the Internet Society for the opportunity to be participating in this panel. It's really a privilege. And also the Government of India for having consultations around the ITRs and around Internet governance. I think the importance of consulting at the national level is fundamentally important to identify what the issues are among the stakeholders at the national level in order to contribute to the international dialogues. So the panel's title is Net Neutrality and Where Does India Stand? And we've already heard several different topics come up under the concept of net neutrality. And so I think it does reflect the fact that issues dovetail with each other. Whether it's deep packet inspection or privacy or cloud or interconnection or investment or transparency, we need to be clear about what we're talking about when we're discussing it, and also how the issues that we're discussing might impact something else unintentionally or intentionally. And that's why these multi-stakeholder dialogues are so important. I don't need to say that the Internet's evolution has been rapid, and where we are today was never anticipated yesterday. Part of that is because we've kept government regulation out to a large part and government dialogue as an important element of it. In sense, the multi-stakeholder approach in order to try to find solutions that are functional and scalable. I've been asked to touch briefly on the net neutrality part. There's no question that it's a lively dialogue. And as we know, many topics get thrown into it. I think there's a fundamental issue, though, about understanding Internet policies and how the Internet functions. We heard from Dr. Pepper earlier this morning that not all bits are created equal, and there's issues around speed and latency. That's an important element to the dialogues around net neutrality. It's really about the user experience and managing the networks for that user experience. So when you're talking with your mother, you don't want to be disconnected if you're having a video conference. If you're sending an email, you're anticipating it'll get to that direction. It may route itself differently, but the video conference is pretty important, especially if you're talking to your mother, at least my mother. So let me tell you a little bit. In the United States, the background is as follows. In December 2010, the FCC issued an order on network neutrality, which really emphasizes the transparency to address net neutrality-related issues and to ensure that customers have the meaningful information necessary to make an informed choice about the services available to them in the marketplace. And importantly, the FCC's rules, which went into effect in November 2011, also embodied a case-by-case approach to addressing problems that might address and exempt enterprise customer services from these obligations. What's important is that the consumer-driven open Internet. So basically that the Internet is open and unrestricted platform to access lawful content, service, and applications. Now, as many of you are aware, these points notwithstanding, our company has been very concerned about the FCC acting outside of its authority available to it by law. This goes to the jurisdictional question and the points that have also been relevant here. And in that context, the concern about the legal authority is the primary focus of the judicial appeal, which we filed in September 2011. Other companies and organizations have also filed appeals for other reasons. And we expect that the FCC's order remains pending before the court, and a decision is not expected until 2013. So obviously the discussion in the United States is still underway. In Europe, there's also been quite a bit of dialogue, some at the national level and some at the European level. Most recently, the body of European regulators for electronic communications, referred to as BEREC, came out with a proposed final report and several consultation documents. And among these are their findings on traffic management analysis in Europe, as well as a draft set of guidelines for service quality and a separate report on IP interconnection in the context of net neutrality related issues. In general, the views of BEREC that regulatory intervention in IP interconnection is simply not warranted at this time, and their conclusions on the issues around net neutrality included the following points. A competition is expected to discipline operators and ensure the best offers for consumers, but this critically relies on effective transparency and the ability of end users to easily switch service providers. That is the issue of competition. Both NRAs and end users should be able to monitor the performance of the Internet Access Service and the application used via the Internet Access Service. And where competition and transparency are inadequate or insufficient to address concerns, existing regulatory tools should enable the NRAs to address net neutrality-related concerns for the time being. So this does relate to the broader Internet governance-related issues. We have a rapidly changing technical environment, and today's norms were never anticipated yesterday, and so we really need to avoid decisions or regulations that have unintended consequences. We need to have dialogues to ensure that we're looking towards mechanisms and solutions that are transparent, that enable competition and investment. Oopsie, and I'm almost done. Allow for continued innovation and the user experience. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So obviously we see differing points of view on this issue. Just to provide some additional information, some countries in Europe have actually gone ahead and proposed frameworks and even legislation on this issue. So we have Norway was the first country which actually came up with some framework by which network neutrality could be enforced. It was not a law, it was a framework for the stakeholders to follow. And Netherlands has been a country which has actually legislated on this particular issue. Just to respond to one particular point that Teresa made, more from an elaboration for all of us, is when we say discrimination, there can be different kinds of discrimination. And I think the presentation that we had in the morning about different kinds of traffic maybe requiring different kinds of treatment. You know, the issue of latency, that email doesn't require that kind of a latency which video does. So there might be a possibility of a discrimination depending on the type of traffic. So this is something that, for example, the Norway framework allows. But what net neutrality advocates say that the discrimination cannot be dependent on who the sender is. So if there's a discrimination between text and video, that discrimination has to apply to all parties. So you can't have an arrangement with YouTube for a particular special treatment for YouTube's video and not offer that same use. There should be complete no discrimination between one video provider and another, and that should be enforced. That's something that might be a food for thought for this whole issue of latency for different kinds of traffic. So we have the second last speaker. I'm very happy all the speakers are sticking to the time, but I'm happy to hear their points as well. So we have the second last speaker, Prakash Sugantan, who is a Prashant, sorry. I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Prashant Sugantan, Council for Software Freedom Law Center, India. And software freedom is something that we are much more familiar as a term over time, and what the whole principle of software freedom has to do with the issue of connectivity freedom. So the user's connectivity not being affected by factors beyond the user is something that we might possibly hear from him. Over to you, Prashant. Thank you.
Thanks, Guru. Of course, freedom is very important, whether it is the software or the network. And that's exactly what we are discussing here, the freedom as far as the network is concerned. Well, let me start with a quote by Tim Berners-Lee, often considered to be the father of the World Wide Web. He gave an analogy. So he said, keeping the medium and content separate is a good rule in any media. When I turn on the TV, I don't expect it to deliberately jump onto a particular channel or to give a better picture when I choose a specific channel just because it has the right advertisements. He said, I expect my television to be an impartial box. That exactly is the key term, impartial, neutral. That exactly is what we want the network to be. So Teresa was mentioning about FCC, the regulations that they have in the US. And it is based on three key principles, the net neutrality as defined there. And across the world, it is the same principles. So to give a proper perspective. In fact, Ajit Balakrishnan had explained the principles, in a kind of framework. But, I'll go into details regarding it. So, the primary one is that there should not be any unreasonable discrimination. So, that is, you should not discriminate between content. The network provider as such, he shouldn't discriminate between any video content or maybe an email. He should not discriminate between, as Guru said initially, a web page of an NGO or a web page of a multi-mega dollar corporation. That is very important. There should not be any discrimination. And the second one is transparency. There should be transparency as far as network management is concerned. The kind of principles that you use to manage your network, how you're managing it, how you're trying to discriminate. These are things these are very important as far as network is concerned. And the third one is there should not be any blocking. There should not be blocking of any content. You can block content only if it's illegal. Apart from that, you cannot block any content just because it is against your company's maybe business interest. And these are the principles that are being discussed on a global level. But are these relevant in India? Should we really have this discussion in India? I think we should. Vikram just mentioned that there is always a lot of investment involved in getting the pipes, getting the network. And this exactly is what the top executives of the leading telecom company in India said. They said that Google and Facebook, they are using a lot of network resources and they need to pay them. Now that exactly is the problem. And just imagine a case, I build a commercial complex. I rent it out to people. I find that one person is doing extremely good business in my place that I rented out. I find that, oh my God, he's making a lot of money. So can I say that, I should get a cut of his business? That he should be treated differently? So that exactly is the problem that I think we need to discuss. And the second question was raised here was regarding the jurisdiction. Who is going to control this? Who is going to ensure that there is this neutrality, there is network neutrality as such? And that is why we have the regulator here. We have a sectoral regulator. We have the tri-person. I hope Arvind definitely will, with Arvind Kumar we have from TRI, I hope he will make sure that we have a maybe consultation process. And definitely the question regarding jurisdiction, definitely they have the jurisdiction, they have the power to do it. If you look at the TRI Act, the act which governs this, they can make recommendations regarding measures to facilitate competition and promote efficiency in the operation of telecommunication services. That is exactly what we are talking about. We want to ensure that there is competition. There is a debate which is happening in the US whether it is a sectoral regulator or the anti-competition or the antitrust agencies, which is the right forum. That, of course, is a discussion that we can have. But it is like saying which is best, whether you want to cure the disease, whether prevention is better or whether the curing is better. Of course, I would say the prevention is better. That is why we have sectoral regulators, to ensure that the business is done in a manner which the consumers benefit, which everyone benefits. So I would say, of course, the sectoral regulator has a role in it. If things go bad, definitely we have the Competition Commission. Let's have a discussion. I think at the end of the discussion, we have maybe a consultation being floated by TRA where we can maybe send in our recommendations and take things forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Prashant. Before I hand over to the last speaker, wanted to highlight this issue. We may think that this issue, maybe some of us may think that this issue is theoretical in India. We haven't had any case of actually the network neutrality principle being violated. That's not actually true. There are well-known cases of telecom companies providing, let's say, Facebook free. And the first time anybody sees that Facebook is free or surprised because Facebook is free, right? You don't pay for Facebook. But what it really means is that when you log on to Facebook, you don't pay for the connectivity. And on the face of it, you may say, so what's the problem? Somebody is giving me something free of cost. So what is the implication? And here I go back to the software freedom concept, which is not to do with the muft, but the mukta. Whether the user is free to actually choose between different options available. And if today it is between Docoma and Facebook, and tomorrow it is between, let's say, Docoma and Pfizer, wherein Pfizer's drug information reaches you much faster, much better than that of the World Health Organization. Or let's say Pearson's, which is a very huge American company's information about what education is reaches you much faster than Eklavya, which is the NGO in Madhya Pradesh. Then the whole issue of whether the net is transformational or not, which is the question that the Joint Secretary of in the Ministry of DIT, Mr. Raised in the morning, saying that the internet has to be transformational. So what is the kind of transformation that we're looking at? And in this whole scenario where network neutrality is already being violated in India, what is the take of TRAI, of course? So we would like to hear from Sri Arvind Kumar, who is Advisor Network Spectrum and Licensing, Telecom Regulatory Authority of India. What is the take of TRAI on this whole situation? How do they see the situation develop? Because obviously the situation is going to get more and more complicated. And what are his views on the issues of who will provide the network? How will the network be provided? How is the traffic going to be managed? Which is an important issue that the telecom providers look at. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, moderator. And good afternoon to everybody. From last panelist of last session, you can understand the importance of this subject for the FICCI, that they have put it as a last subject. And importance of further regulator, they have put me as a last panelist on this subject. So
hold FICCI responsible for that. It's my choice.
But nevertheless, perhaps most of the things has been said on this aspect, on net neutrality. He has not done neutrality with me also. He has put more questions before me than any other panelist. But nevertheless, he wanted more answers from me. Equal treatment of all content. In regulatory principle, we called it as non-discrimination. In telecommunication, we started non-discrimination means do it. Non-discriminatory, non-discriminatory access, non-discriminatory interconnection. Here we say don't do it. It's open network. It is by default, it is non-discriminatory network. Please don't try to put the things so that it will make discriminatory. So approach from telecom side, approach from data network side or internet side is opposite. Here's open network. You want to say, please don't do it. Rule is this, don't do it. In telecom, you have to do it. Don't be discriminatory. And it is just coincidence. We started non-discriminatory things as a regulator when we have 25 million telecom subscriber. Today we have 25 million internet subscriber. So this discussion is mere coincidence that in telecommunication we started that yes, markets would be open. At that time we were having only 25 million telecom subscriber. Today you can say voice subscriber. Today we have 25 million internet subscribers, and we are discussing this. This gives that it's a coincidence, and this issue has to be discussed. Actually, we have become habitual of regulation. I don't know whether regulation is required or not required. Can we have some self-guiding principle on that? Let us assume we make a regulation, you will be non-discriminatory. How to check it? When in my computer, in my office, when internet is slow, I ask from my LAN people, local area network people, computer people, my internet is going slow. Oh, that problem may be with the website, not from your internet side, not from my speed side. It could be the problem from the other side. That website may be slow. So it is not only important just to make or have the regulation that it should be non-discriminatory. You will not give any incentive, you will not give any priority to any content, but how to get it checked. So this is also to be discovered by the people who are working on this subject. Regulator can make the rules, make the regulations, but how to get it checked. This is equally important. As far as TRA is concerned, telecom service provider are the major infrastructure provider for any data network, for traveling any data on the network. Our license clearly says that consumers should not be discriminated. That means right of consumer is already taken care by the TRAI. Whether it is a ISP license, whether it is a unified access service provider or any other license. It simply says you will not discriminate against any consumer, whether consumer of this side or consumer of that side. But still, there may be need of the regulations from the TRAI side. Somebody has already raised the question whether TRAI have jurisdiction or not. Other has given answer, so we don't reply on this question. So it is very good that one panelist asked that we have to have that transparency in making any policy. I must assure him. In fact, we used to have open out discussion on almost all subjects where we give recommendations to the government of India or we make ourselves regulation. Maybe more awareness required to be created. We will definitely do it. We have in different parts of this country, generally in Delhi, but sometimes in Hyderabad, Bangalore, or wherever you want. Somebody told network should be dumb network. Let it be dumb, but don't make it dumb. Make it dumb means kill itself. So once you will kill itself, there will be no. So starting moderator said, make this network dumb network so that everything go here and there. When you make network dumb, that means you are killing the network. In idioms, English, make dumb means kill the network. So let it be dumb. There is no issue on having the dumb, but don't make it dumb. Generally, regulation, when we talk about the physical layer. We talk about, but here we are mostly talking about the top layer, application layers. We have to see how much regulation could be made on that very layer. As far as the physical layer concerned, we have non-discriminatory things in our part. I think I will not take much time because you want more questions and answer session. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Arvind. We'll now throw the hall open to questions and comments and suggestions. We'll start with...
Thank you very much. For context, I started dealing with the net neutrality issue when I was at the FCC developing policies, including on net neutrality. It wasn't really called that at the time, then it was, right? 8 years ago, 9 years ago. So this is not new. Most of the conversations about net neutrality, and I think this is a really good one as well, and this actually is a very good one because the participants is completely and totally multi-stakeholder, right? And this is what the whole meeting today and yesterday is about. But it also reflects a broad set of confusions about what net neutrality is. Everybody has their own definition. And as a result, oftentimes we lose sight of what the problem is we're trying to either prevent or solve for. So there was an earlier statement, I think at the beginning, I think maybe you, Mr. Chairman, talked about all intelligence is moved from the core to the edge. We have dumb networks, and the intelligence is at the edge. Well, actually, that's not quite right, right? It's a false choice. It's not either intelligence at the edge or in the core. It's intelligence in both places, and they need to work together. The real issue, and this is where the FCC evolved the FCC's policies. The FCC viewed it as both a question of consumer protection and competition protection. All right, so if you're asking what's the problem I'm trying to solve for, you don't want network operators to be or anybody to be anti-competitive, including content providers, and you want consumers to be protected. So the policies that the FCC developed in 2005 and then evolved over time, but are at the core, were, I think, mentioned. And there were basically four. First, every consumer had the right to connect their own device. Second, consumers had the right to download and use any legal application. So you could download an application, software, operating system, different kinds of devices, and just make them work. Third, you could have access and use and access any legal content. And fourth, which is probably the most important, and by the way, in Ofcom in the UK, this is their key principle, that consumers have transparency, so that people know what they're buying and they can see whether they actually have gotten what they thought they bought. And then that becomes very self-disciplining. One of the things that the FCC did was it recognized that networks do need to be managed, and networks are managed. And I appreciate your reference to the presentation I made this morning about not all bits are created equal. We need networks fit for purpose. One very, very simple example, quickly. As I mentioned this morning, most of the traffic, 2/3 of the traffic in India, we forecast is going to be video. But when I send video over the net, and I send it to my smartphone, it's a small little screen. I probably only need maybe 100,000, no, probably 50,000 pixels maybe. But when I'm sending it over for IPTV to my big, meter-wide flat panel screen, I need a megapixel, 1,000,000 pixels minimum. So if I'm sending the same information, it's either going to be too much for my smartphone. I'm going to throw away 95% of the bits, so it's a waste of network capacity to do that. Or alternatively, if I send the number of bits that are correct for my smartphone, but it's going to my big flat-panel television, it's really going to look terrible. So what's happening now is that through the network, and networks are able to sense the device that's connected to it, and at the other end transmit information to the content provider so that the server at the content provider actually is able to send the right amount of bits for the device that's connected at the other end. That's a great example of how intelligence in the network works with intelligence at the edge in the device and in the application server. So again, it's a false choice of one place or the other. It's both. And so networks have to be managed. There's no question about it, especially as we're having this data deluge. The real question is, are they being managed in ways that are pro-competitive or anti-competitive? Are they being managed in ways that are pro-consumer or anti-consumer? And it seems to me that that's what we should be focusing on. And there's a lot of regulation already. I mean, TRA already has regulations if there's anti-competitive, anti-consumer behavior. So then it boils down to the question is, do we need new ex-ante regulation for net neutrality? Right? And I actually don't think so. Or if there is a violation of the principles of consumer harm or competition harm, do we have tools that ex post we can then go back and actually catch and detect and punish bad behavior? The U.S. experience is that there was a question of how do we find out? Well, nothing is hidden on the internet. And in fact, the two cases that are the famous cases in the U.S. of what became enforcement cases by the FCC were detected by end users and made very visible and aware to the FCC very quickly. And in one case, it was resolved within several weeks with some telephone calls to the operator. In the other case, it was an FCC case. So that's, sort of trying to put it in the context and taking a step back and saying, what's the problem we're trying to solve for? Let's do it in an intelligent way, and at the same time, allow the networks to be managed because they have to be. Otherwise, actually, it will harm consumers and applications and content providers. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll have. You raised your hand? Yeah.
Okay. The question is to Mr. Vikram. See, the reason why net neutrality was, or rather net non-neutrality was thought of in US was because of unlimited download that was available, and people were using it for peer-to-peer. And the problem with peer-to-peer is something that you just set it on and it will just keep on transacting without anybody present. The whole premises behind the various data plans were on the basis that a human being would be using it for a certain period of time, and that's a net usage that would be there, and that's practical. So that's where I think there was an effort to reduce the unlimited download or constrain that, right? In India, fortunately, all the operators have started with fair use policy. So there's no concept of unlimited download. I mean, in fact, the data rates go down very steeply. So it's kind of from 4 Mbps you get down to 256, just not usable after that. So if you are already implementing fair use policy, is there really a case for discriminating between bits of this source and that source.
See, the point is not at no stage do we want to discriminate between bits coming from a particular source, right? And just for your input, even with the fair usage policies, I know lots of kids, college-going students, people in rural areas, you buy a $10 pack for the whole night, and the whole night your mobile is on and downloading. Right? So it's not that it is just that it happened in the US, that, the unlimited data, because of, the smarter the device, so obviously the consumption of data is going to increase in any case. So what Dr. Pepper was saying, there is a case to manage the network in a manner that the end consumer, which Arvind said, he's getting his value for money. There is a disproportionate amount of data consumption between a normal device user versus, on the other end, if you take the iPad and the tab user, right? So your networks are designed for a particular, traffic flow. If that traffic flow is going to get upset, and the example that comes to me is, you're a Delhiite, you have this debate on the BRT corridor, right? So there's somebody who wants to go down the BRT corridor, free flowing, right? Lots of traffic flow that, and the rest of the world is just, bumper to bumper. So there is a case where you need, for the entire lot of consumers, that the traffic flow has to be put in the right manner. Otherwise, I'm going to be hauled up by the TRAI again for QoS norms, right? So this thing keeps, you have to keep balancing this out as we go along, right?
Can I just ask one thing as a follow-on? Why not handle this with the, say, different type of data plans, say staggered data plans? I mean, you have users who are good users, sparse users, but they would like to have, low latency.
The market is open, and all the operators have got all kinds of data plans to, provide service to that segment of consumers. I think we in India have a very, a very wide choice of data plans.
That's right.
So that way, I don't think that's a problem.
Why not net neutrality?
It is neutral to the guys who are accessing it. It's just that some sites are, some sites are drawing a disproportionate amount of traffic. So it is not the neutrality aspect, but management of the network aspect, right? That's the balance you have to keep having. Otherwise, you'll run into the other issues of QoS and stuff.
Yeah, Parminder.
Carrying on from the present discussion, I had another point, but I'll make it afterwards. I think there's a big difference between when the consumer pays and the sender pays. And I think nobody's speaking about, and as the gentleman said, that you can use all kind of plans to get enough investment for your networks, charging the consumer. But when the sender pays, it distorts the structure of the network. It distorts the network. When a consumer pays, how much ever he or she pays does not distort the network. And that's a big difference, because when the sender pays, then there is a traffic moving at different speeds for different senders, and that's a distortion in the network, which we have a problem with. The main point which I took the mic for was to respond to not only my old friend Robert Pepper's comment, but also of some other people on the panel, perhaps. And I think, I hear a lot often from economists and business people and technologists that people who take a political social stance on network neutrality really do not know what they're talking about. And I really mind that, because we do. I think we should like the economists, the corporates, and the technologists to understand what we're saying, even if they don't agree with what we are saying, because we know what we are saying. The issue of the internet is not just a market. It's not just a business. And when we go to other speeches, we talk about empowerment, how internet changes life, societies. So it is something beyond the markets. It's a political force, it's a social force, and within it, it is economic structure. And this decision or this discussion is at a political social level. Society decides to take certain trade-offs. The trade-off is a right of that society to take. It's not merely a question of technology proprietary or business houses. Internet is a playing field, and the playing field comes before the game begins, in a way. And the game could be market, but internet has certain elements which are meta-market, beyond the market. They're social, political. And that decision of equal playing field is a political, social decision, and people who talk about it really do understand. As Guru said, making differences between types of services is different when there is no commercial advantage, but it is done in a neutral manner. But what we are trying to speak about here is that can a level playing field be preserved? Does it give equal empowerment to everyone? And those principles, I do understand, could have a trade-off vis-a-vis certain technology developments I do not mind, certain business interests I do not mind, if that society wants to take that decision. Media is also a kind of a business, but media is regulated by different laws than selling toothpaste and soaps is regulated by, because media is a democratic space of a different kind. In a way, internet is also media. Internet is also space for political participation, political voice. All those spaces are in it together, and the decision therefore is socio-political. And I think we need to do something to keep it as a level playing field, even if there are trade-offs on the technology and business side. And that's the framing of the question. Thank you.
The last person.
Okay.
If there are, we will close the questions at some point in time, and I'll request all panelists to respond. If you have any specific response, you can come in. Yeah. So, So shall I? So anyway, we'll end with a couple of minutes from all the panelists, but we'll hear.
Yes,
at the back.
sir. My first basic question is, since we are in a completely capitalist scenario, what is the problem if Docomo and Facebook have a sort of a trade agreement and they agree to share their profits? Why are we supposed to interfere in them? And secondly, if I am a user and I decide that I just need to access one website, why will I not want a data plan from my data provider which facilitates my needs? So why should the government interfere in my personal choice, and why should the government interfere in the corporate choices of two major houses?
If there are there any other questions? Otherwise, I'll request the panelists to respond one by one. Any other questions from anybody else? Okay. So what I'll suggest is that we'll go in the same order. Maybe we'll start with you.
Don't do that. Don't go in the same order, but I'd like to jump in. I'll tell you one issue. All of the debate today, and I looked through this topic for the last 2 days, lives in a world of unreality. None of this has anything to do with the Indian internet. I can tell you that. Okay? It has nothing to do with the Indian internet. This is some make-believe thing that like children play in a playground. None of these issues are real. I'll tell you what the real issues are. The tariffs for internet in India are the highest in the world, with the exception of Myanmar. Foreign visitors should know that. Okay? The total number, it is true, the total number of internet users in India who would be considered actual users, 8 million users account for 85% of the activity in a country of 1.3 billion people. And you may say, why is this so? Why is this so? Because I told Mr. Sibel, I work with him in many committees, all of you, policymakers and activists, are in a make-believe world. You say there are 100 million users, everything is fine, all we need is democracy. The reality is extremely expensive bandwidth. And why is that so? Because 99% of access in India is from the English-speaking group, with only 8 million people. So they access sites which are in the United States largely. So you're paying for large transportation costs. Sending email through Gmail will make circles around the world and come back here. The number one reason for expensive access is that sites are not hosted in India. And sites will not be hosted in India because most of them are taking protection under the Digital Millennium Act. So that is one reason we have to address the politics of it. The second portion why access is slow is in Indian 3G is among the slowest in the world. I'll tell you the reason why. Facts on the ground. 60% of base station to base station connectivity in India. Do you know the width of the pipe? They are E1 lines. They are E1 lines. In Bombay city, close to 45 to 50% of the base station connectivity is E1 lines. This is the reason. E1 lines are voice lines, and people will laugh at you. So telecom operators have not made the investment needed. I was present at a hearing when TRI held in Hyderabad. I was sitting in the back bench when the TRI said we have the 60,000 crore plan to have a broadband. And you know, the telecom operators stood up and said, sir, please don't do that. Allow us to make some money on 3G. Those idiots did not know that they need the fiber broadband to take the backhaul. So I'd say the fourth reason is the technical ignorance of our telecom companies. Most of them thought it's very wise, and they outsource the entire network operations to third parties. So inside these companies, there is no expertise. There is not one intelligent technologist you can find inside the top 3 companies. Not one. Because they have given away the network operations to Ericsson and IBM, etc., etc. So all of these there are real technical and operational reasons why internet is not proliferating in India. It's only 8-9 million active users. All of them English speaking. All of them English speaking. The concerns are esoteric. The concerns are net neutrality, freedom, democracy. You could do that, and you go to America and fight these causes. The real issue in India is there discrimination? There is. The discrimination is the average kid who's in a government municipal school does not have access. All your children have access. So the real issue is to make internet access available to a minimum of 200 to 300 million Indians. And that can happen only if there is a public fiber optic network put. No private company in India will put it. They do not have the financial wherewithal anymore. When they had it, they didn't do it. So I just remember the debate, please keep it grounded on the ground realities of the country. Our real challenge is to get some operationally intensive, technically knowledgeable people into our telecom companies and give them some say, and make sure that our goal is to put, a high-speed broadband available to as many of our people as possible. Maybe in the next 2-3 years, get to be at least 300 million users, and not play around with 8 million users and discuss freedom of expression, freedom of press, who are you to say? There's a limit to that. I think it's outside the ground reality. I just thought I'd say that.
Okay. I'll request Mr. Vikram to make a 2 minutes each for the closing remarks, and then I'll just wind up. And then we don't have any buffer between now and the next session, so we have to close at 5:45.
Yes, react to some of this.
Yeah, certainly. We hopefully will have time. Yeah. Good.
So that's interesting. There's no doubt that there is a huge investment required by the country into bigger pipes that need to interconnect. I mean, nobody denies that. But to your point that the telecom companies don't have smart enough people, I think they have smart enough people. And yeah, you may be. So it's a work in progress. You have to continue to get smarter and smarter, right? So it's more of techno-commercial. This lady saying, okay, 15 minutes left. We got it. Okay. So, of course, there's no denying the fact that, the vacuum that was there was voice. That vacuum has got filled up in many ways than one. The demand for data services obviously came second to voice, and that is going to get filled up. But everybody, for a country like India, we would love to have that kind of a highway network. It's like the equivalent of your national highways program. So the broadband optical fiber program. We're really happy that the BBNL is going to connect up panchayats. Right? You may have heard it on the other session. But there again, they're only going to connect up the panchayats. In urban areas where all the users will continue to reside and demand the more data services, it's 80 lakh rupees per kilometer in Bombay for right of way. So, by the time you balance all these things out, it becomes a more interesting debate. So that's the point, Ajit. The other point which I'd like to come back to the overall net neutrality aspect is, of course, from the COI perspective and our members, we are fully, fully with the country that yes, it should continue to be neutral. Innovation must prevail. Because if you put any curbs of any sort, we should be careful in not trying to regulate where regulations are not required. I'm sure the industry, with its own dialogues with our partners, the content partners, will be able to forge a good enough platform and access which is good for the consumers. The work to be done that's important is that there has to be transparency. So the transparency part of what the consumer is paying, he should be getting it, right? So that's the important part. I think I'll leave it at that, and I'll be happy to hear more.
Marks from you.
Okay. Vikram and a few other panelists have talked about network management as if it's necessary. And my only concern is that it could stop with something harmless, and it does not stop there. And for instance, if we say that email can tolerate latency and video cannot tolerate latency, so we'll fast track video and instant telephony. And it will come to a point where one video provider is given preference to another, and would also come to a point where certain content is disallowed, and which will lead to a point where certain users are barred. So, I mean, it's beyond the net neutrality issue, but I'm saying that something that starts as harmless would progress to something harmful. So it's very important that we draw a very strict line on net neutrality, and these are my views, my personal views. Thank you.
Teresa, can you?
I'll keep it very brief because maybe I think there might be some more questions. I think that the points made here show that there's still a vibrant dialogue even within India, and obviously issues about network building out and things of that sort. I think in the context of some of the concerns that might be expressed, I think the point of transparency is critically important, and also that consumers, at least from our experience, don't hesitate to make their views known. And so if they're not happy about something, they will be the first to speak up. Or they will seek another option. So competition and transparency are fundamentally important elements to these dialogues. But to some of the concerns of sort of the slippery slope argument, consumers speak up. We had a situation in the U.S. where a bank decided to charge extra for using your ATM card. And a consumer ran a campaign, and the process was changed. So one of the challenges with the Internet is the challenges that we're discussing at this conference and the opportunities, but bringing everybody together in these kinds of forums is fundamentally important to finding solutions if solutions are needed. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll start with that question on whether government needs to interfere in what maybe a business does, a kind of agreement that they enter with another business. Yes, we need to. Because that is what the law says, and it is the imperative of the government to ensure that there is fair competition. That is why we have a competition law in India, the Competition Act in India, to ensure that there is fair competition. So if a telecom company enters into an unfair kind of an agreement with another party, which could affect the, if they enter an agreement with Facebook, that could have a detrimental effect on maybe a Google Plus or some other networks, some other companies for that matter. So in that case, definitely, the government needs to interfere in it. Government isn't, in this case specifically, the Competition Commission maybe. And the other questions. Now, what Ms. Ajit Balakrishnan mentioned regarding, there are major issues that we need to deal with, like the broadband access and issues like that. Of course, there are issues in this country. Our country is a vast country. There are issues like poverty, education, etc., that we need to deal with. And that is, I think, even if you look at civil society, industry, most of us try to deal with these issues. But that doesn't mean that we don't deal with other issues also. We can't decide that, okay, let's try to eradicate poverty, let's try to have maximum education, and then let's get into other issues. That's not how things happen. We need to ensure that we address all these issues at the same time. That's because our country is diverse and we have a lot of, the number of citizens, the population is huge. So let's try to discuss definitely the access issue and also these issues also to ensure that we have a vibrant internet, a vibrant community. Thank you.
We have actually 10 more minutes. So what I'll do is I'll request the last panelist to make some remarks, and I think we may have time for a couple of questions if people have any, and then I will sum up before we close.
Thank you, Guru. Not comment, actually. I would have more takeaway from this meeting, which is very important. It started from the experience of FCC, on any of the issue. When US feel colds, we feel fever. And for internet, especially where out of 3, 2 packets are going towards USA, when you are feeling cold, then we must feel some dengue kind of thing or swine flu kind of thing. It is not the fever. Therefore, my takeaway is there is a need to have an ecosystem. We need to have ex-ante regulation to protect the interest of content service providers, value-added service providers, and to, of course, consumers, for which regulator is. One of the most important takeaway from my panelist, Mr. Ajit, I have never thought in this manner that this very famous minute factory kind of model, which we used to say that we have best model of the world to have narrow band wise, which you call is at such a cheap rate that could be not good for broadband. I think this is the very good takeaway from their side, that this minute factory model we used to call, that the way one of my major telecom service provider used to say, this is minute factory model. We are working. What is the cost of 1 minute? Everything has been outsourced. So if I am earning 1 rupee, I am paying 80 pesos something. And I have never thought in that manner. This is one of the very important takeaway for me. We as a regulator has to examine this thing.
Just for you to remember this clearly, in my humble opinion, for a telecom company to outsource a network operations is like outsourcing sex in a marriage. I want you to remember that.
I don't know whether it is a lighter remark or it is an actual remark, so I won't comment it. So, but I see it from the lighter side only. But yes, of course, there is a need to self-inspection, which he told, that whether this outsource model, connectivity between BTS is of only one, even if really this is an issue, then I don't think we will be able to achieve any speed from our 3G network. This is all useless. And we are all dependent only on this wireless for penetration of broadband. All our targets are based on the wireless. And I think if this is so, as a regulator, it is a very good takeaway from his side or from this meeting, that we have to examine it, whether this outsource model, how something which was good yesterday may be bad for today. And this meeting is itself for future network. I think this is for building the future together. So we have to build future together. Then we have to, it's not for, I think we are not, as he told, that there is no problem which is connected to India today. That is why they put the name is building the future together. So they are not talking about the actually present. They are all talking about the future of this country. This is what I wanted to add. Thank you.
Any one comment, question?
I think we have normally the customer has the last word, so the buck stops with us.
Sorry, I'm going to have the last word. I'm not the customer, I'm the moderator of the panel. So, but you can have the second last word. Go ahead.
What I wanted to say is, we have talking a lot about the net neutrality, but how to go about it. I think a discussion was started in the sense that there has to be a proper management. But I doubt whether network can really manage it, only the operating systems. So whether open source or such movement can probably give some direction as to how the edges can themselves manage about the device, bandwidth and rating and such things. So there has to be more discussion seems to be on that. Another thing is we have this VVIP pilot culture on the road. So we do not know what will happen to the QoS debate as such is going to be. Now the thing is, cloud was mentioned, and telecom is more towards, saying that it's a ocean out there and the tributaries, but water doesn't flow back to the tributaries. It has to be, a cloud burst. We have to have a better analogy in saying that there has to be a cloud burst from the heavens. There has to be an analogy to the rain rather than to tributaries. So since the data is out there in voluminous, so how do we look at the net neutrality from that content point of view?
A small question I wanted to know from Arvind Kumarji, whether TRI is now in building the future together going to look at talking on this issue, have consultations, and I mean, even if you have no clear idea whether you take it back from this meeting, that TRI should probably be suggested to do something on it.
We will definitely work on this subject. This is important.
Yeah, last comment and then.
Well, maybe it's a comment. I agree with Dr. Paper that as far as regulation is concerned, probably protecting consumer interest is already in place. Anti-competitive is already in place. So I think, and consumer redressal is also already in place. So probably when you talk about such a topic, net neutrality, we might not need a regulation at this stage when Mr. Ajit also pointed out that only 10, 12 million subscribers we are talking about today. And we got to focus more on the penetration side of it, connecting those rural part of it, and making those applications which are suitable for the rural part of my India, who are non-English speaking people. For which I believe the NOFUN project, the broadband project, which they will use the USF fund, that will make the reality. Why these operators were not able to reach those rural India? Simply because from a ROI point of view, return on investment point of view. But when government is supporting those projects, probably that penetration will happen. And when you talk about net neutrality, things will pop up of its own. I mean, I don't see any regulation is needed on that. Again, a lot has been talked. When things are not broken, why do we want to fix it? Let's not fix it. Let's focus on what is needed really in India. But when you see it from a mobile broadband perspective, affordability is the key. When you go to the rural India, the affordability is the key. When the things will be affordable, when the network built out, when the spectrum cost, when the number of operators, now on one side, when we see that we have 16 operators, things have become affordable. But then it has also created a problem of sustainability. Is this model sustainable on a longer term? But then on top of it, the spectrum price has popped up. So there is a balance. I know that the moment you will make unlimited band plans on the mobile internet, that will have a backward impact on the network, and it will need a huge capex investment. So probably, some balance has to happen that, some innovative business model will evolve, and that will make services affordable as well as take care of this net neutrality. One last comment on the managed services part of it. I represent Ericsson. I think transferring the managed services was not the reason that they have lost the intelligence, but they still drive that network. They tell me what need to be extended or what need to be expanded. I'm ready to expand it and go for a fiber. They tell me, I do it. They debate, they discuss with me weekly, bi-weekly, how is my network health, what's quality of service, so I do comply what they want to comply. They only transfer it to me because that was the business model suitable for them. And I could bring synergy combining my resources to take care of the different network, not only within the country, but multinationally as well. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we are just running out of time, so I'll make some closing remarks as a moderator. And I can't guarantee you that I'll be completely neutral in my own summation. The first is, I think I simply can't understand the argument that since only 8 million people use the internet, network neutrality is not an issue, and that access is. Because I think there is no hierarchy. It's like saying so few people travel on airlines that airline safety should not be an issue at all. Let's worry about the train safety. I think worrying about one doesn't preclude you from worrying about the other. Dr. Pepper spoke about how complete neutrality is actually a myth, and that's the reality of the situation. He gave some examples. I'll give a much more simpler example, spam. We know, I've read that more than 80% of all email is spam, and there are methods of recognizing spam, and the network providers actually kill spam, because if a mail is being sent about somebody having expired and millions of dollars waiting for you in their bank account, and that mail is being sent to millions of people all over the world, it's very simple to figure out that that is not actually valid, and there is a good enough reason to kill that particular mail. So there, it's very difficult. There's, of course, from an ISOC point of view, it's good to take an extreme point of view that no packet should be touched at all. And I think not necessarily on management of traffic principles, I'm not coming from that, but from various other principles of the net, that there may be reasons to evolve a set of principles by which a service provider could be allowed to play around, to inspect, to understand what a packet is. But the minute we start that, I think I'll go back to you are on a slippery slope. Because incrementally you will find more and more reasons for playing with the packets. And that is why there is a need for regulation. I think when people say there is no need for regulation, they are actually fooling themselves. Because if you admit that you cannot have an extreme, which is that there are two extremes. One is the provider can do nothing. That's an extreme. In which case you don't need regulation. Or the provider can do anything that they want. And if you're not arguing about either end, you're talking about something in the middle. You're talking about a set of principles. And therefore, I think TRA has to look at what principles, under what principles will they allow Docomo to give Facebook free of cost, or they will not allow it. This is a question that has to be understood and responded to. So it's not, there are clearly different positions, and from an extreme position of ISOC saying that nothing should be tampered with, to saying some things can be tampered with is important. The principles are important. Is the principle, if it's traffic management, then the whole issue that there can be discrimination between different kinds of traffic, but not for a kind of traffic between different players. And I think the biggest fear that the advocates for network neutrality have is of the collusion possibilities between the content provider and the service provider. And my friend at the back who said, what's wrong with Docomo giving Facebook free? I think the point is something that I mentioned. The internet is not merely a marketplace. The internet is the most powerful resource of society. It's a social force, it's a political force. People attribute great powers to the internet for the Arab uprising and whatnot. So you must understand that it's not merely a consumer-producer relationship that dominates the internet. There are various aspects to it. And when Facebook is being given free, it's obvious that Facebook is anyway a monopoly. But let's say there are competitors. Those competitors are being discriminated against. So competition law is straight away being violated. And Facebook, personally, I don't care too much about social networking. But let's say I want information about health, about education, about basic social change. Yeah, about basic social change. Then I'll be very worried if there is a collusion between Pfizer and Docomo, or between Pearson and Docomo. So it's a social altering phenomena. The other question that I think still to me was unanswered was, if discrimination is required from a point of view of economic provision of infrastructure, wouldn't different kinds of plans actually suffice? That's a question that never, I think, didn't get an answer for me, which is that unlimited plans are an option. It's not that there is a law that you must provide unlimited plans. I don't think there is anything like that. So is that a method to manage traffic is also a question that I think TRI needs to look at. So obviously the last word on the subject is not said. And yeah, just Shiva clarified that I kept saying ISOC views. He has clarified that it is personal views. Yes, but I like his personal views, and I hope he'll influence ISOC to have them as well. That's off the record. Thank you very much. I think it got heated when questions and answers came. And I hope we take this along further in debating about net neutrality as we go along. Thank you very much for this session.